Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Animal agriculture is vital to Nebraska. Livestock production not only contributes to our food supply, but also helps our rural communities. Livestock provides revenue for schools, creates jobs, supports Main Street, and enhances the future for farm families. The Nebraska Soybean Board's Animal Agriculture Initiative works to encourage growth of responsible livestock enterprises to benefit agriculture and Nebraska.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Luke Beckman analyzes U.S. and Nebraska crop conditions ahead of Monday's USDA reports. Shane Ellis looks at this week's cattle market run. Bryce Anderson talks about Nebraska's recent stretch of wet and severe weather. And Charlie Wortmann discusses how heavy rains are affecting soils in Nebraska's fields. Luke Beckman from Central Valley Ag is our corn and soybean market analyst this week. The party starts at 11 a.m. Central Monday morning for those who follow the two commodities. That's when the USDA will release its reports on quarterly grain stocks and planted acreage. At the end of March, the agency projected U.S. farmers would plant nearly 91.7 million acres of corn and a never-before-seen 81.5 million acres of soybeans. It also estimated corn stocks at about 7 billion bushels and soybean stocks at 992 million bushels. The crop that's in the ground now is in remarkable shape according to the USDA's latest crop conditions report. It's markedly better than last year's, even considering recent weather problems. Parts of Minnesota and Iowa received 8 inches of rain last week, and parts of northeast Nebraska caught showers totaling as much as 1 foot. Yet, even after that heavy precipitation, high winds, and hail, the National Agricultural Statistics Service said both Nebraska's corn and soybean crops improved in condition ratings from last week. We talked with Luke Thursday morning to look at these factors in play leading up to Monday's reports. Compared to normal, what does the current crop of corn and soybeans look like across the U.S.?
You know, nationally, Jeff, we've really seen things off to a banner start. A lot of that certainly seems like it's pushed to the eastern corn belt. Problems in the northern belt in the Minnesota and Dakota areas. Nebraska obviously had the problems in early June, but Monday's report saw Nebraska's ratings up a couple of points, seeing big drops in Minnesota with all the moisture they've had. Overall, though, you're certainly hearing a lot of analysts, the Chicago crowd to the east, talking about how things look really great out there.
You have a lot of locations throughout northeast Nebraska. That's one of the harder hit areas of the state. Do you have a sense of what the crop looks like in that region?
Well, Jeff, I mean, it's no doubt those June 3rd storms certainly took some acres out of production, knocked them back for producers who wanted to replant. Stuff that was maybe not affected, it does look good. Color and growth is coming around. You're probably going to run into some nitrogen issues in the corn with all the rain we've had. Some lighter soil certainly moving some of that in through the root zone. Severe enough to affect overall production of either corn or beans? Nebraska producers would like to think so, but in the grand scheme of things, probably not. Beneficial moisture in that northeast portion east of Highway 81, those producers certainly liking the moisture on crops that were not affected. So probably going to see some good production there to offset maybe some losses we've seen from hail. First in Nebraska, will there be a shift or a significant shift from corn to more bean acres because of what we've been seeing? Well, you certainly could see that, Jeff, but if we're talking about the reports on Monday, I don't think we'll see that. Now, those reports are going to report on late May and early June survey time period, and really that's when those storms were kind of coming through. So you're probably not going to see that. You're not going to see that reflected in Monday's numbers, I don't think. Harvested acres is probably where those hailed acres probably show up, and that's going to happen later this fall when the USDA adjusts that. How about across the country? Do you expect to see more bean acres come out Monday when the USDA releases its planted acreage report? I do think so, Jeff, and really we go back to prevent plant a year ago, and really there were so many acres in that pot, and when you would add up key principal acres here in March when the USDA gave us those numbers, certainly seemed like we were missing something. So soybean production maybe a touch higher, looking for a number around 82 million. Look for corn maybe just a shade higher as well, closer to 92.
Both a little bit higher then?
I would think so.
The stocks number, soybeans first, that's one that everybody really seems to look at. Based on what you're seeing from crush and export numbers, what could we see for a stocks number?
Well, I mean, crush and exports really haven't slowed down this year. As you know, they really needed to, but we just haven't seen export cancellations like maybe we thought. So really from a stock standpoint, it'd be great to see something north of 380 million bushels. The range of estimates is very wide. You're talking 100 million bushels. So expect a fun day Monday, but we do need to see that number probably 380 or north of there. And Jeff, they're probably going to use that number to back into a supply revision from last harvest. We just need to have more beans around, and the cash market's been telling us this summer that maybe beans aren't as tight as we thought.
Do you have a thought on what corn might be in stocks?
Stocks numbers estimates are going to be, maybe 1 billion bushels higher than a year ago is kind of where the average is falling in. So 3.7 billion compared to 2.7 a year ago. So feels pretty adequate on the corn side.
Okay, your gut feeling on overall whether this will be friendly, neutral, or bearish in both corn and beans on Monday?
From an acreage standpoint, everyone's kind of leaning towards more acres. Trade certainly feels that way. When we talk about stocks, corn, we know there's a lot out there. We've known that for a while. Beans is going to be the volatile one in terms of stocks. But look for higher acres on corn and beans. Stocks levels on beans is anybody's guess. Corn probably right in around that average level.
Let's talk about 2015 production, and 2015 numbers will probably get some steam or maybe a little wait after we see Mondays. But do you have targets for sale first on corn?
Corn, a month ago when we were kind of up against that 5 level, we were talking to producers about, hey, let's put a floor under some of this stuff. Give us a good start for next year. We've retreated since then, so it doesn't feel like a place we want to do a lot of sales just with the time horizon that we have left to deal with. But if we could see a retracement on these charts, we'd be interested in that 475 up to 5 area on a floor idea for corn.
And soybeans?
Soybeans did creep north of 12 here. They've been up here, with beans climbing and bouncing a little bit here the last week or so. So north of 12 does feel like a good spot on beans, just with the potential for a good crop in the acres we have this year, and then South America is going to get their shot again come this fall.
And finally, Luke, basis in your area, how strong is it now, and where do you expect it to go?
Well, basis it's an interesting conversation, Jeff. It's held on a lot longer than we thought it would. A lot of corn out there, and with the board dropping in corn, sales have been very, very light. So really expect that there's corn around, and it is going to come. So we're maybe expecting a pre-harvest. Before harvest, basis feels like it could get sloppy late this summer.
Next week, Roy Smith will join us to discuss corn and soybean market reaction to the USDA's reports and look ahead to the July crop report. We also have cattle market analysis this week with Iowa State Extension economist Shane Ellis. Crop and livestock markets diverged Tuesday as corn, soybeans, and wheat all closed lower, but their livestock consumers soared higher. Live cattle, feeder cattle, and lean hog contracts all touched new record highs midweek. While it's likely hard to complain about the current levels in either hog or cattle markets, a concern that burns brightly on the radar is meat prices. Arguably the most visible type of pork, bacon climbed nearly 36 cents from April to May, reaching $6 a pound for the first time in history. All fresh retail beef fell 3 cents in May to $5.45 per pound, off 3 cents from the most expensive mark set in April. However, the supply concerns are more evident in what's now the smallest cattle herd since 1951. Shane joined us Thursday morning to talk about those concerns amidst this week's new tops in the cattle markets.
I think that we're watching a combination of things coming together, kind of a perfect storm for the cattle market. The live cattle has definitely been driven by that prospect of shorter supplies in the beef chain. Just the number of cattle that are on feed right now and the number of cattle that they're hoping will even be available later on in the year has definitely caused some strength in our cattle futures. For most of the contracts for the next year, we're looking at well over $1.50. And this strength has really been continuing on since about April time, as just basically almost a linear increase during that period of time. On the feeder cattle side, it's that combination of live cattle prices and then also alleviation of the concern over the coming crop. So the 2014 crop is coming along quite well, and we seem to be getting adequate moisture through most of our corn production states. And so that's helped alleviate concerns about that increasing feed costs later on.
What do those profit margins look like right now in the feedlot?
Right now for the feedlot, the cattle that are on feed right now and probably on through until August, September, most of those cattle will be coming out of there with a profit margin of over $100 to $200 at least, depending on how they were forward priced. But right now, just looking at where the cash market is and what the animals were placed for and the cost of the feed that was going into them, this rally in the live cattle market has really come back and put a lot of strength in the cattle finishing margins. Going out a little further than that, though, because of the shortage of the feeder cattle, the cattle finishers are having to pay out or pay back most of their potential margins right now. So once we get into cattle that'll be sold in October and then on through the next year, a little bit closer to break evens on most of those returns.
You had mentioned a perfect storm. It sounds like it's raining over in Iowa today as we can hear the thunder behind you here. Now, you mentioned in September when we last talked that you thought it was going to be 2015 before we were able to even start rebuilding this cow herd. Calving next season, more producers are probably going to start to hold back even more heifers. Does that mean that we're going to see sustained high levels in both feeder and live cattle markets?
I think that we will see these prices stay quite high. The futures market is anticipating additional beef coming into the food chain by middle of next year, looking at what those feeder live cattle prices are in the futures. So they think that there will be additional beef available. Just the shortage that we're seeing right now as far as the availability of beef is, yes, there's less in the supply chain. We're still exporting a good amount of beef where we haven't really backed off on that at all. And that is really, that extra strong demand that seems to be holding in there so far. Now, how long will that hold, particularly with consumer sentiment? That's kind of a mixed bag. As far as, building the herd, is that drive going to continue to be there? I think it definitely will. The folks that are kind of holding the reins right now and are going to reap some excellent profits for the next several years will be our cow-calf producers. That is going to give them some incentive to build that herd, to expand their number of beef cows that are out there and actually producing. Now, we did see an increase in the number of heifers being retained this year. And those heifers that were retained, they're going to be calving next year in 2015. I still think that will be the year that we see a larger calf crop. Once those calves are actually ready for market, we're looking at maybe 2016, 2017 before we actually see a turnaround in the supply of beef.
Next week, University of Missouri Extension economist Ron Plain will be with us to analyze Friday's quarterly hogs and pigs report. Those numbers weren't yet released by the time of our weekly taping. As I mentioned at the open of the show, parts of the Midwest, including Nebraska, saw heavy rains last week, totaling 8 inches in parts of Iowa and Minnesota and up to 12 inches in northeast Nebraska. For growers in large chunks of the state, the moisture has come early and often, and for some, hail and high winds have tormented corn and soybean crops. Earlier this week, we talked with DTN senior ag meteorologist Bryce Anderson to ask if there was a reason behind these weather events and to see what might be in store through July and August. We've seen a lot of rain, a lot of hail, and a few tornadoes already this year in Nebraska. How common are this many events?
The idea that we get severe weather during early season for the growing season here in the state. I mean, that's kind of typical. But the occurrence on almost a regular schedule every 2 weeks starting back in mid-May, that's a little bit out of line. Usually you think that there's going to be a pretty intense period for maybe about 3 weeks or so, and then things start settling out. And we haven't seen that all the way into mid-June.
Are there reasons behind this?
I think that what we're seeing is the result of a long-standing weather feature over the Canadian prairies in north central Canada that has been an area of blocking high pressure up in the higher latitudes that has forced the storm track kind of consistently south here over the north central part of the country. And then you add that into a little bit of an indication of some El Nino related energy out of the Pacific and the development of a Bermuda high over the southeastern U.S. And so we've had a lot of fairly consistent factors coming together to keep things on this real stormy trail that we've had.
With that in mind, I'll ask you a two-part question. First, would you consider these events extreme weather events? And two, is this going to be normal, years into the future?
Well, I think that we can say that these weather events have been extreme, particularly with some of the tornado outbreaks that we saw in northeastern Nebraska. I mean, this has been a year where the storm track has been focused kind of over the north. There were more tornadoes in Nebraska during the month of June so far than we have seen in Oklahoma all year, for example. So that is really kind of out of line, so to speak. And as far as are these going to be more frequent, is extreme the new normal, to use a cliche? It really looks like it is, Jeff, because we have seen over the past 10 years or so that other than hurricanes, extremes in dryness, in heavy rain, in high winds or tornadoes, they have been well above a 100-year average across the country.
What do you expect once we go to July and August? There are probably not only farmers who have their crops this high, but also farmers who are just at the ground level who have replanted as well.
At this point, July looks like it's going to be a pretty good month for the Corn Belt, because the models are showing fairly mild temperatures. We've seen that so far. The idea that we're going to have a sudden turnaround to a real hot pattern, that's pretty much not really a part of things at this point. And then we've obviously had a fairly active precipitation track, and that's the way things are playing out as well. So I think that July is shaping up to be mostly favorable.
And any thoughts or any indications of what August might hold?
August sort of runs the same way. I think we could see a little bit of a warmer trend in August, but still nothing that's going to just be a real stressful month in regard to temperature and precipitation. This is shaping up to be one of the better seasons that we've had. And I should point out also that June 22nd, the crop ratings on June 22nd at 74% good to excellent for corn were some of the highest that we've seen for a while. And going back to the mid-1980s, when you start out the crop season with those kind of ratings, it usually leads to a very good corn crop.
We heard so much about a La Nina pattern earlier this year. You wrote about an El Nino hybrid type of thing. Tell me more about it.
Well, there is some discussion in climate circles on both sides of the Pacific, U.S. and Australia, that what is actually happening in the Pacific is going to be an El Nino development, but one that has basically warm water in the middle of the ocean and then cooler on either side. That's called an El Nino Modokai, and it was first identified back in 1986. If that develops, it may lead to a little less persistent rainfall later this fall in the far west and in the southern plains, but it also might mean that hurricane action is a little bit greater than if we would have just a straight El Nino.
We'll have another look at weather in a few minutes when Al Dutcher gives his weekly weather forecast. The U.S. Drought Monitor has shown continued improvement for Nebraska after sustained moisture in many areas of the state. Prolonged drought looks to be over now for about half of Nebraska, which is a big improvement from the 3% in normal condition on October 1st. But some of that moisture has come at a fast rate and in large amounts, causing flooding and ponding in some fields. UNL Extension Nutrient Management Specialist Charlie Wortmann joined us Thursday to discuss some of the soil issues that could cause.
Well, the big concern is the loss of nitrogen with the rain. And there are two loss processes we need to be concerned about. Leaching of nitrates is probably going to cause us the greatest loss, and this is especially important on sandier soils. So you get the combination of these heavy rains with the water going in. If it runs off, then it's not so much of a problem, but if it percolates in, infiltrates and percolates through the soil, then we lose nitrates. The other is where water stands for some time, and we get denitrification, which something that occurs with waterlogged soils. And so this would be occurring in depression type of areas or poor surface drainage, but also soils where the water does not pass through very quickly. And how much losses is going to depend on the situation. Some guidelines for the denitrification is somewhere between 2 and 4% of the nitrate N per day. Probably like 2.5%. So if you have about 100 pounds of nitrate N out there, you might be losing 2.5 pounds per day. With leaching, again, so much depends on the situation.
Yeah.
But you have to look at your crop canopy, how much yellowing you have out there, and then decide. If it's relatively yellow, you might put on maybe 50 pounds side dress application or through fertigation.
Should you look only for those cues, or would you recommend soil sampling outright?
At this point, we don't have good interpretation of soil test results. We have something called the pre-side dress nitrate test. This is intended for earlier use. Now, if they've replanted or planted late for some reason and the corn is still at the 4 to 6 leaf stage, then the pre-side dress nitrate test could be used. And there you're looking at how much nitrate you have in the top 12 inches and then making decisions on that.
We've had a report or two from UNL Extension personnel around the state about iron chlorosis in soybeans. Can you first explain what that is and then maybe talk about some management options that farmers might have?
On some of our high pH soils, we, especially if they're calcareous, that there's free lime in the soil, we do get this problem of iron chlorosis, where the plant doesn't have enough iron for normal metabolism, and we get it expressed in the upper leaves of the crop. Soybean is more affected than corn, but corn also is affected. It tends to be worse when we have wet conditions. So if you have fields that are prone to this iron chlorosis and you've had these heavy rains recently, the problem might be worse than usual.
Is there any in-season management option?
The only in-season management option, and we're not too happy with it, but is to do foliar application of iron. And that can be as iron sulfate in solution, or it can be a chelated iron. And they should work about equally effective. One is more expensive than the other, but iron sulfate, the less expensive option, should work as well. A problem is that generally when we have this problem, our crop is small. We don't have much leaf area to collect, to catch this foliar application. And we can only put on small amounts, and to really treat it right, it would probably have to take 2 or 3 applications. At the same time, conditions are changing in the field where maybe the crop itself will, it'll change so that the crop can get enough iron. So it's sort of a hit and miss type of practice, but in some years it can pay off for you.
For more information on corn disease after hail and soybean seedling diseases after recent storms, you can view our interviews with Tamara Jackson-Sims and Lauren Giesler from last week's episode. Now with his weekly weather outlook, here's UNL Extension state climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here again for the weekly forecast. Pretty much nonstop rain for this past week, although not everybody received it every single day. We did see a scattering of precipitation every day since last Saturday. The heaviest precipitation fell basically across southwest, south central Nebraska. We've seen lighter totals the remainder of the state. We did have some heavy precipitation, of course, last Friday up in the Omaha Metro and south central Nebraska, where we did have some localized flooding. So overall, if we want to count the data from Saturday morning through present, many areas of southwest, south central in the 2 to 4 inch range. We had some isolated totals around the Omaha Metroplex area, approaching 7 to 8 inches. Of course, most of that fell with the Friday through Saturday morning event. Now, it does look like we have a couple more days of precipitation to deal with, and then there may be a drying trend as we get into the midweek period, with the possibility of just an outside chance of some shower activity, particularly across eastern Nebraska as we get into the early part of the 4th of July. But overall, it does look like the festivities for the evening of the 4th of July look fairly dry. So let's take a look at the upper air models and see what we might expect. First thing I'll draw your attention to is we do have a trough that's working through the region. We do expect some fairly significant precipitation across the state, starting from west, then moving toward east during the afternoon and evening hours. The potential for severe weather exists today across central and eastern Nebraska. We could see an isolated tornado, but the main problem we'll be dealing with is heavy rainfall, high winds, and the possibility possibility of large hail. Now, as we go into tomorrow, some of that energy will slip off to our east, and we'll get a drying trend, a little bit of residual precipitation, very slight possibility Sunday morning or tomorrow morning, and then we'll see a re-energizing of the atmosphere as we get into Sunday afternoon, with the potential from northward to southward extent of thunderstorm development Sunday evening and into Monday, with the best chance over the eastern one-third of the state. Now, as we get into Monday, that trough will start to push a cold front through. We may get some residual precipitation in northeast through southeast Nebraska, but as we get into western Nebraska, the precipitation probabilities drop off rather significantly. But as we get into Tuesday, it looks like the remainder of that system passes to the east. Just an outside chance of some morning showers across extreme eastern Nebraska. And some fairly nice conditions with some warming temperatures both Tuesday and also on Wednesday as we start to see a high pressure ridge build into our region. Now, as we get into Thursday, what we see in that ridge taking place, there may be some scattered thunderstorm activity around the periphery of this ridge, particularly over northern Nebraska, but for the most part, it looks like the remainder of the state will remain dry. Some of that activity may shift through eastern Nebraska by Friday morning, but overall it looks like very warm conditions. Everybody will be in the 90s on Friday, and it should be spectacular viewing weather as we get into the fireworks on Friday evening. Now, as we look at the temperature forecast, the cool conditions remain this weekend in the northern part of the state, and we'll see a warming trend next weekend with a potential for even 100-degree readings across southwest Nebraska, particularly during the afternoon hours. As we look at the 8 to 14-day forecast, looks like normal temperatures from next Thursday to the following Tuesday. In terms of precipitation, again, normal precipitation, although the models are going to a slightly drier tendency.
Thanks, Al. Today's interviews on grain markets and livestock markets, Nebraska's recent weather events, nitrogen leaching in corn, and iron chlorosis in soybeans can be found individually on the Market Journal website and through the Market Journal mobile app. Next week, Roy Smith will analyze corn and soybean markets, and Ron Plain will recap USDA's quarterly hogs and pigs report. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
America's export of soybeans helps the U.S. maintain a positive agricultural trade balance. Nebraska contributes half of its soybeans for export. The protein and oil content in soybeans enhance the growing demand for higher protein diets. The Nebraska Soybean Board promotes research to develop new soybean varieties with higher protein and oil content for major agricultural markets. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.